you know, you can watch the videos and you hear other people say it, but sometimes you have to do it yourself to realize that like no one actually cares in some way.
Yeah.
The tipping point, I suppose, where that was the thing for me. I think I just had enough. Could I have held on to some hair for like 2-3 years? Probably, but I didn't. I kind of stopped seeing the value in that when I realized how insecure and anxious I became, how deep that insecurity was. I really realized when I was like, wow, I really was doing all this stuff over the last year or two. When you think about how much it's impacting your life, it's a pretty big deal. When the Uber Eats guy's delivering my food, just says my name, you know, it doesn't seem, oh, that's the bald guy, or like when I'm collecting the post, see someone I haven't seen before. It's very easy with insecurities to try and just almost not think about them at all and like borrow yourself away and not ask yourself the difficult questions about how you actually feel. I guess really ask yourself how it's making you feel. It's walking around and the wind's like blowing through and you don't have to worry about what your hair looks like or all this kind of stuff. Like very liberating feeling. Like I would genuinely recommend it because that was something that was on my mind for years.
How's it going, everyone, and welcome to the Baldcafe podcast. We're back here with another episode, and today we got Tom. He's 23 and he's joining us from Las Vegas. How's it going, Tom? Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me. It's good to be here. Yeah, I'm doing well, thanks.
Good. So we're just going to jump straight into it. Talk to me a bit more about this thing that you mentioned where, you know, it took some reflection and it took you, did it actually take you to kind of sit down and think about it, or just give more time to the thought of, right, what am I going to do about this hair now?
I think for me, it was just this phase of I could see it consistently getting worse over time. When that happens, you naturally become a bit more self-conscious about it. It was always in the back of my mind. I mean, I think I even started watching the videos like a year, 18 months ago, and I wasn't necessarily thinking about shaving my head like 18 months ago, but it was just on the mind because I knew I was losing my hair. I knew I would get to that stage eventually. I think for me, I was never afraid of becoming like the bald person. You know, my dad's like very bald. I mean, he has like the horseshoe and the bit of the thing at the front, but you know, effectively he's pretty bald. I don't think he'd mind me saying that. And then when I look at like, you know, people I grew up around, like teachers and stuff who were bald, like, I never feared that thing. I never looked at it as like a negative thing. So I wasn't really afraid of becoming the bald person. I think for me, it was just the maintaining the hair reached a certain stage of like, it got a bit too ridiculous to maintain. It was just taking a lot of my time and a lot of my thoughts. And I mean, this was even the case 2, 3, 4 years ago, you know, when I was like 19, 20 years old, I started to wear hats when it was windy. I mean, it was even on my mind then, you know, because I always had very fine hair. But I think in the last year, I could just seeing it getting to a point where you could start seeing through it a tiny bit. And that made me like very anxious. And I was like, I don't think I can really keep up doing this because it's just taking up too much of my thoughts. And it really adds up, you know, thinking about it, you know, a few times a day, sorting out your hair, you know, half an hour a day. You know, talk a year or two of doing this in the morning, it's a lot of time that could be spent more productively elsewhere. It just didn't make much sense. And I never really was afraid of becoming the bald person. So it was quite a natural thing. If anything, I had really long hair for the last, you know, ever since I was probably 8, 9 years old. So I didn't really know what I looked like with short hair. So I was like, yeah, I'll just shave it off and see how it looks. And yeah, I think it looks pretty decent. Like I haven't really had many like bad comments or anything. So, you know, it's okay.
Brilliant. It wasn't something that you had like set yourself a date for and you said like, right, when it gets to this point, I'm just going to do it. It just sort of naturally progressed into that.
I think that point is different for like every guy. Like they have a level of acceptance of like how it currently looks. Because, you know, I think I just personally became uncomfortable with it. And maybe, you know, I wasn't like old man thinning, you could see through it all, you know, I just felt quite uncomfortable. And that's at a different stage for some people. I think for you, remember seeing your videos, I think your crown started receding a bit. You probably shaved your hair a lot earlier than a lot of guys would if you just gave them that similar situation. And I think I don't think it was in like really, really, really dire straits. It was just something I didn't want to deal with it. And I could just see it getting worse. And I was like, you know what, I think I'm just going to do it. I wasn't really like, it just was. It wasn't like my life was in like a bad place either. You know, things were generally going quite well. So I was just like, it just seems like a pretty decent thing to do. I didn't really like tell anyone about it beforehand. I was like, I just think it's time. And
felt like the right time.
Yeah.
No, you're right. I think it's different for different guys, isn't it? And it just really comes down to how much it's affecting you, or like how much it's occupying your thoughts. And I say that all the time. You know, it's not about. It doesn't get to a point where, you've got X amount of hair or this percentage of decent hair coverage and then you should shave it off. It really isn't about that at all. And it's actually difficult making these videos sometimes because everyone has a different perception of, oh, that guy's got loads of hair. You know, someone in their mind could have like their hair's terrible and it's making them feel awful all the time. And another person might think they've got loads of hair compared to me. Like, what the hell are they doing? It's an interesting point, really, about how different people perceive it. You know,
it's like a very personal struggle, and that's why I think the thing with your channel, the more perspectives you put out there of people going through things, the more relatability people can find, and they'll grab little snippets from one person, a bit from another. Oh, I struggle with that as well, you know, that kind of thing. And it's just very useful. And the more someone can like question how they feel about it and see different perspectives, the more of an informed decision they can make about when it's the right time for them. You kind of don't really realize how much it affects you till you look back on it later on, and then you realize how much of your mental energy it was taking. Like, imagine walking into a cafe and looking at the lighting of the cafe to see where you should sit. Like, this is stuff we should never be thinking about as, you know, as people. So yeah, it's a really big thing. And you can like, I think I found myself sometimes like falling into my shell a bit and not being I'm not a very outgoing person anyway, but just definitely like holding back a bit, and just, it really shows.
I think one of the scary things about it as well is the more that kind of goes on, it becomes like normal, you know, it almost becomes, you don't even question it. There's comes to a point where you're not even questioning it because it becomes the normal part of your sort of routine and how you kind of navigate the world, you know?
Yeah, it's second nature to put the hat on or tilt your head a certain way when it's windy or something, you know, and it's quite a dangerous road to, you know, to go down, I think.
Definitely. So now there's this theory that you've already lost about 50% of your hair before you really realize, like, oh, I think my hair's falling out.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if you've
No, I was going to bring up that same point myself. You know, like by the time you realize you're losing it, you're like barely far down the hair loss road. It's not you know, first weekend. It's probably like years, you know, a lot of the time.
Early on, you notice things like hair, you know, quite a lot of hair on your blazer. You wear hats, take it off, and you said a teacher even mentioned to you like, oh, you've got quite a sort of big forehead.
Yeah, I guess I always had a very like tall hairline. Yeah, and I think I used that as a bit of a, oh, it'll be fine, I just have a tall hairline. When it was receding initially, I was like, it's a nice like cop out to try and say that it's not happening, but you know, it was happening. It didn't get brought up that much, but there were times when I was like 16, someone said, oh, you know, you have a receding hairline. I didn't really think about it too much. I was like, oh, okay, you know, that's just there. And I didn't really give it too much thought, because when I was like 18, 19, it was still in the realms of like, I guess, relative presentability, where like I didn't think it was obvious that it was thinning, and I don't think people would really say like, oh, he's losing his hair. But you know, there's just small things, and I did think it, looking back, it probably did start at 15, 16.
Right.
And you know, that kind of thing runs in my family a fair bit as well. So yeah.
Yeah, you mentioned your dad, of course. So it runs in the family. During this time, then, so early on, in your mind, you're kind of saying it might not be, you know, I'm not definitely old, right?
Exactly.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, it's, you know, it's just what you tell yourself to try and make it seem like it isn't happening. You know, like, oh, maybe it's just a mature hairline, maybe it won't recede that much, and then, you know, over the years, especially the last 12 months, I could see it getting gradually worse. And there would be times in my mind where, like, I guess it would always be there, but there would be like a couple months go by, I don't really think about it much, and then another month I'd be like, oh, I should probably shave it off pretty soon, and then another month I'd be like, oh, it's, you know, I'll just keep going. And then it just got to a point where I was like, one, just kind of, I guess, morbid curiosity, because I guess my hair was dying in some way, but just curious to see what it looked like, and I just wasn't happy having long hair. It just got to a point where I wasn't okay with it, just felt very insecure, and just the next logical step seemed like shaving it off.
Got to the point where it isn't serving you anymore. I spoke in a recent video about it's not like facilitating any sort of growth, or you're not moving forward in any way with it. It's just more holding you back, if anything, right?
A lot of holding back, yeah. With the help of your videos as well, I mean, I saw that was a common trend, and then reflecting a bit myself on like how I felt, I could see it was really like repressing my growth as a person. So that was just a big motivation to just, okay, we're going to go do it now.
I think it's good that you managed to kind of reflect like that and recognize it. I think that's massively helpful, of course, because I suppose it was at a point for you where it wasn't so all-consuming that you couldn't really think rationally about it. You know, almost look at it from like a third-person view.
Yeah.
You know, you sort of zoom out and look in at like, okay, how is this actually affecting me? Like, what am I doing day to day that
Yeah.
isn't helpful for me?
I do think though, what did help me, which gave me a bit of an edge to shave it off, is like I was never afraid of being like the bald guy. Whereas I know people that it's like the end to them if they lose all their hair. You know, I mean, I've been at work sometimes. And you hear like the 20-year-old guy just who's got a full head of hair. Or if I lose any hair, I'm getting a hair transplant. I can never be bald. As I said, I never had that worry. I never like had any even like an ounce of negative thoughts about like bald people or anything. So
Yeah.
I didn't have to overcome that barrier, which probably made it a bit easier. Definitely made it a bit easier in hindsight.
When you talk about seeing like your teachers, obviously people in your family, obviously you'd seen people, day to day who were bald. And like you said, you didn't think anything less of them, or
No.
it wasn't a thing. It was just another person, right?
Yeah, exactly, another person. It wasn't even that sucks. That's unfortunate. It didn't even, and this was at like the innocent ages of like 8 and 9, like, and even like as I got older, it was the same thing. I was never like fearful. I guess what made me shave it was just the insecurity of where my hair was in the current moment. Like it just became very thin and you could see through it. And I was like, all right, I'm done with this. It wasn't like the fear of being bald or anything. It just, I wasn't, as you said, it wasn't really serving a purpose. It just became a massive weight on my shoulders, which I didn't really want to think about because I knew it was only going to go one way and it's going to go worse. I didn't just want to let it go on for years and just, or cause extra damage. So I thought, let's just go for it. I think the big thing is no one really cares that much. Like people really don't, it's like when the Uber Eats guy's delivering my food, just says my name, it doesn't seem, oh, that's the bald guy, or like when I'm collecting the post, see someone I haven't seen before. No one says anything. Like you're just another person. So it's just that internal fear which builds up, which is just it's not really that constructive. So
that's an amusing analogy. Think about it. It's like you go to the doctor's office, like, oh, the bald guy, like, oh yeah, that's me. Or you said, the Uber Eats guy. No, I like that. Early on, did you ever like talk to your father or talk to anyone about it, your friends or anything like that, or did you kind of just try to ignore it?
Not really. I didn't really confide in many people, to be honest. I mean, I guess that's potentially quite a common trend. I mean, that's one thing your channel's helping with. More people are being more open about it, but it's like one of those things that you don't really talk about too much, and maybe people take the piss a bit saying, oh, nice hairline or something. But in regards to constructive conversation, I don't think much is had. I think maybe a year ago, my mum brought it up. I went to see them and she kind of subtly brought it up in conversation, as mums do. And I kind of she was like, oh, your hair's like maybe thinning a bit. You should try like a shorter hairstyle, or maybe like you could like at one stage just shave it off. It's not a big deal. And that was nice to have. I used to stay with them during lockdown, which was like 2-3 months ago now, and I had like a small little haircut. And she was like, oh, it's not as bad as you think it is actually. When I had such thin hair, it's not like you saw through lots of it. There would just be pockets where like a tiny bit where you could see it, and that would just freak me out. I'd be like, oh, I can't do this. But she was like, oh, it's not that bad. And I think over the last month or two, it just became too much to really handle. Like I wasn't having anxiety attacks. No. I could just realize that this isn't a path I really want to go down. I just want to try and like nip it in the bud before it gets too bad, because I could see what was like the writing was on the wall in regards to how I was going to feel if I didn't make the change. So that was a big thing.
I can relate so heavily to that, all of that stuff. Absolutely. Do you remember though, was there an element, did that conversation talking about it with your family, with your mum, did it feel awkward at all, or was it not a problem?
It was, I think I was a bit taken aback at first, just because no one really brought it up, especially like a close family member. But I guess it was a reminder that she did notice as well, and she could probably see that it wasn't an ideal thing. It was a bit anxiety inducing, because I think sometimes it's like when you're in there would be times when I would be with friends and they'd be like, oh, well, I should be fine with my hair. My dad's still got his hair at 50. And I'd be like, oh, I feel very awkward in the conversation. Talking about hair, because I knew I was like losing one.
Waiting for it to get round to you, right?
So it did make me quite anxious, and I guess it was quite anxious whenever it was brought up in open conversation. But I think the conversation with my mum, like the few of them we had, brief ones, it kind of helped. It wasn't like a planned out, I'm going to mark the date on the calendar. It was just, I went home one day, I had some clippers, and I was like, I think this is it just felt like the right thing to do.
The right time,
yeah, it felt like the right time. And when I initially shaved it off, I think it wasn't like instant, this is amazing. It was more the first hour or two, I think, at least for me, you're just getting used to how you look, because I never had short hair for, 10 plus years. I didn't really know how I looked, how the top of my head looked or anything. So that took quite a while to get used to. I mean, I can compare it to like a slightly more enhanced version of like when I first got glasses at 15. It's like you're never used to seeing yourself with frames on your face, and then you do, and it takes a while to get used to. But it really only took me, I would say, a couple of days to get used to. And then yeah, it was fine. I didn't really think much of it. It felt like a big relief after like the first couple hours, where I was a bit like, well, this is a big thing. It felt like, yeah, I'm definitely glad I did this. Walking around and the wind's like blowing through, and you don't have to worry about what your hair looks like or all this kind of stuff. Like, very liberating feeling. Like, I would genuinely recommend it, because that was something that was on my mind for years. And just to not worry about that in the slightest way was just great.
Yeah, I love that word. Guys often describe it as that, like, liberating, freeing, massive weight off your shoulders, because you think you've been carrying that massive burden. And like you said, if you actually can sit down and think, right, how much time am I giving to the thought of my hair or losing my hair, and how much time am I spending on concealing it or looking in the mirror and things like that? It really can add up. And I think that's actually a useful task, not just kind of think about it. But I had another guy once, he actually like wrote it down. Every time he'd think about it, he would like write it down or something.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, he'd get, this bit of notepad out or whatever, and he'd be like, that's an issue, that's not normal.
Very big issue.
And I think it's upon that reflection and things like that, when those can often be the things that help you get the kind of confidence and the courage to say, like, right, I'm just gonna, as you described, nip it in the bud now and move on from it.
Exactly. Yeah. That was a thing. And I mean, when I started losing it, I think the same time I started watching your videos, I think everyone looks at the alternatives a bit like, oh, do you want to take the drugs? And for me, I never really wanted to go down that road of like, let's take Rogaine. I didn't even try it once, so I never really had any aspirations to. The idea of just taking a drug, one, with side effects, and then two, as soon as you stop taking it, you lose everything, didn't seem like something I wanted to go down. And I did feel like with like hair pieces and hair transplants, like if people are comfortable doing that, that's like good for them. I mean, I brought up the one guy you had on, like Joe Tillman, and he actually seems like one person that's fairly comfortable with the fact he has a hair transplant.
Yeah.
I feel for me personally, it would just be quite disingenuous to myself, and I would always be hiding away from my problems. And it would be the same reoccurring. Do people notice I have a hair transplant? Do people notice I have a hair piece, or all this kind of stuff? And it wouldn't really solve any of the deep-rooted problems. It would just like paper over the cracks of the insecurity. Whereas I think me just going about and shaving my head was a much more like full-on and effective way of dealing with the issues. So yeah, I never really actively considered going for it. It's just not for me. I didn't want hair that badly to justify going down that road, that's for sure.
No,
so,
Tom, I was the same. I was exactly the same. I just sort of just knew that if I went down that road, I wouldn't be any happier. I'd still have this issue of like, oh, I just need to hold on to it longer, sort of thing, And it was already making me feel shitty as it was. And I was like, if I do that, then surely I'm just going to prolong that. I'm just going to keep those feelings going on longer and longer. Or the new obsession is going to be, is it growing back? Or, is it covering over those thin areas now? Rather than facing that fear,
At least what I found mentally, reflecting on how I felt after shaving it, it's not something that I really think that much about. That mental space has just gone towards thinking about other things in my life, which I just value as more important. Whereas, as you said, if you just have the transplant or the prothesia or whatever, the worry just continues. At least for me, I felt it would, and it just, I wouldn't feel confident personally doing it. That's why I never gave it much thought. Like, some people, they need to be in the consultancy room about the procedure, and then they're like, whoa, this is too much. I didn't even need to get to that stage. I just knew it was like the idea of having some grafts like put into a different part of my head. It was something I was never willing to do personally. It didn't feel right. It's hard to really say, because it's some people it definitely works for, but I just thought for me it was the right thing just to not go down that route.
Yeah, for me, I
Yeah,
think the ultimate goal for anyone really is to be just fully comfortable, right, in how you look, to the point where it's not even a thing. Like you're not constantly thinking about your appearance and like, trying to improve it and things like that.
yeah,
You're self-accepting of it and you're happy with it. And like you said, you're more focused on other more important things, or that you consider to be more important. I think that's the
yeah,
ultimate goal. And I think the only value I can see in those procedures and things like that is if they can facilitate someone towards that point, so that eventually they get to a point where it's not the hair that's given them that confidence. It's like
yeah,
by doing all of that stuff, it's given them enough respite from the anxiety of it falling
yeah.
out so that they can, I don't know, go out in public or do the things they want to do. And
Yeah,
that's where they get their confidence from.
yeah. I think not to like bash people that have done that stuff, but I think that's way harder to achieve in reality than just thinking that it's possible. Like, I mean, looking at LeBron, I mean, you did a video on him. The guy's worth how many hundreds of millions? He's
Yeah.
still insecure about his hair. He's got his whatever it is, the transplant or the weave or whatever, falling out halfway through the game. And this is someone who, in some people's eyes, has a lot of things which other people want. And
Yeah.
I, I just didn't feel it was the fix for me, and it was going to solve all my problems. As I said, it's just going to paper over the cracks.
About a year ago, year and a half ago, you said is when there was a sort of turning point with it. And you've mentioned things before, like sometimes you would be able to kind of see through it, and that would bring up a little bit of anxiety and things
Yeah,
like that. You didn't necessarily fear being the bald guy, right? But obviously there was some
yeah.
anxiety. Were those feelings of like, oh, is someone going to notice? Is someone going to comment on it?
A bit of it is you do wonder, are other people going to notice or what they think, and it just made me a bit self-conscious, and it was almost like in some cases you just kind of want to look down or like crawl away and just not really be seen. And just, yeah, it was sometimes difficult in public, or like I just wear hats a lot and stuff, or like beanies or whatever. And yeah, the anxiety was like quite bad. Mainly when outside. When I was inside, sometimes it's not really windy and stuff. I think it was like okay, apart from in like really bright lights. But again, it's just like always worrying about, oh, what if I have to go outside, or do I have to bring a hat today? It was just encompassing so much of my thought. Yeah, it did make me feel like very insecure. I only realized how bad that insecurity was like until after I shaved. Obviously, I knew I was feeling insecure about it at the time, but it was like how deep that insecurity was. I really realized when I was like, wow, I really was doing all this stuff over the last year or two, which I didn't really like think about much at the time. It was just a thing I did. It was second nature.
Yeah.
But then you think about how much it's impacting your life. It's a pretty big deal. It was that accumulation of anxiety in like small moments over the last, however long, even 3-4 years, that just built up, and it kind of reached the tipping point, I suppose, where that was the thing for me. I think I just had enough. It wasn't one big experience, some nightmare experience where like everyone saw it and I was like, oh my God. It was just small little things like working away at my being, I guess, over time, just making me really anxious, that I was just like, oh, I have to pull the plug here. Like, could I have held on to some hair for like 2-3 years? Probably, but I didn't. And I kind of stopped seeing the value in that when I realized how insecure and anxious I became.
Yeah.
Of having that hair.
Was it quite draining? Just having that constant on your shoulder, you found it quite draining, I guess.
Yeah, very draining, and it's just so many things you think about. Is it windy? Is it rainy? Or just something on your head? Are people going to see? It's just, yeah, I think just an exhausting way to live.
Yeah.
I think other guys, I'm sure, can relate to that as well. It is just exhausting because you're pretty sad a lot of the time. Just there's a lot of internal sigh, like, oh, this is my situation. It's a bit unfortunate. And I think when you're not being proactive about it and you're just kind of like mulling your way through it, it can be really exhausting. Like, it can just really take a lot out of you. And like, yeah, there were still aspects of my life where I was like a happy-go-lucky kind of person. I wasn't completely like an anxious mess all the time. But it was just quite a big part, and it was something always on my mind, and enough was enough, really.
You're a professional poker player. Did you find it affecting your work at all?
Yeah, so mainly I play in person, like at casinos.
Right, okay, yeah.
And there are like quite bright lights in casinos as well, so that was always a bit like, maybe people can see through it. No one really brought it up. I guess generally the environment, like I'm in, people are quite respectful of each other and don't really bring up too much of like personal attributes and stuff, but it's still, even though that wasn't the case and people weren't giving me stick, it still like wore away at me just thinking about it a lot. And yeah, it just became quite anxious. Oh, I'll probably wear a hat today. My hair doesn't look quite good. Again, no one really brought it up, but I think just being out all the time and just having to deal with it then. Like if I was just stuck at home all the time, I think it's easier for maybe for the insecurity to burrow away a bit and you for not to not really address it. But yeah, when I was out all the time, it's just like, yeah, after a while, it's like I don't really want to do this anymore. I'm just happy. And like again, no one really cares that much. And like like the people you don't know, obviously they don't know any different. But even the people like friends of mine I spoke to about it and like showed like generally the people's opinions I like respect the most, they're pretty indifferent. Like it just wasn't a big deal. There wasn't like, oh, you look at, like people generally thought I looked like pretty fine, good. Like some people got some nice responses, but no one really made a big deal. I never even think the look looks that bad. I think when some people say, oh, it looks terrible, that's a bit more of them like maybe projecting their own insecurities towards someone else about the fact that they haven't dealt with some of the deep-rooted issues, where obviously like when someone shaves their head, it's quite a big step to like, transforming like how you look at yourself. So yeah, I think there was generally the responses have been good and it's just not really a big deal. And like, whereas for me, when I had like thinning hair, it really was a big deal to me. So
yeah. Once you go through with it, you kind of, and I'm sure you've heard me sort of describe it, this almost like an anti-climax, because you're thinking everyone's going to freak out, or they're either going to be so like, oh, it looks so good, or or it's going to be, oh, it looks terrible, what have you done? When in reality you might get a few like, oh yeah, decent, or like, oh, look not bad. And some people won't even say anything, and you think, oh, wait a minute, I've done this massive thing and you haven't even noticed. But then again, once you can kind of, really think about why that's happened, it's because it's a big, massive thing for you. But for other people, they've never even once thought about your hair or even how long it
exactly.
Look,
I think that's the big thing. Like it was just, at least with the route I took, because I always knew I didn't want to have a hair transplant or take drugs. It was something that I just couldn't control. And I was like, life's too short to care about things you can't really control. There's so many important things and people close to you in life that like, it's more important you dedicate time to that rather than like, something like hair.
So it got to the point where you said, right, you had the clippers, you got home one day and you said, right, I'm just going to do this now. I'm just going to shave this off. Tell me, describe to me a little bit more about that day. Maybe something was there, like you said, there wasn't any big moment, but what felt right to the point where you said, like, when you woke up in the morning, did you think, oh, today's the day? Or was it literally just you got home and you were like, saw the clippers and thought, right, the time is now?
It was actually I ordered some off Amazon. And
okay, so you were getting prepared.
Yeah, I was getting prepared to the extent that I thought I could do it. I wasn't like, I'll do it as soon as I get them, but I thought, yeah, they're there if I need them.
Nice.
And then as soon as they arrived in the box, I was like, it felt like the right time. I was like, all right, let's go for it. And that was, like 10, 11 days ago. Yeah, again, like nothing bad happened. No one brought anything up. There wasn't like a big epiphany realization. I guess it was like, just as I said like earlier, it was just a few small things that happened over time and that just accumulated and it just felt like, there was this internal like, yeah, this is the time.
You mentioned that sort of liberating feeling, realizing, when you got in front of people that it wasn't even a thing for them. There was no freak outs, just a few nice comments. But yeah, how has life been, afterwards on the other side, after kind of shaving off? Have you noticed any other sort of positives that have come from it?
I would just say a bit more of a freer mindset just to go about my life. There's just a lot less internal worry because if I'm honest, that the hair was the only thing I was really ever anxious of. There wasn't really anything causing me that many insecurities. So once that was gone, it just felt, again, it was like this big weight lifted and there was nothing else that really was like bringing me down that much. So that was a really nice feeling because, hadn't really experienced that, maybe ever in my life before really, because when I was younger in my teens, when I had hair, there were other things you're worried about because you're a teenager. But I guess as an adult, like it was just a nice feeling just to not really worry about it. You can watch the videos and you hear other people say it, but sometimes you have to do it yourself to realize that like no one actually cares in some way. So yeah, it was just a big weight lifted off my shoulders, and I think it's just helped me think a lot clearer about just everything really. One of the few moments in my life where I felt like a big shift happened with my mentality. Normally, again, with my like mindset towards stuff, it was normally like small things, but with this, it was, once it was done, it was just this big, oh yeah, things are still fine. The world hasn't imploded because you shaved your head. Yeah.
Brilliant. From your own experience with it, maybe a few things that helped you get to this point. Is there anything that you'd like to share with people watching and who might be able to relate to kind of your story that helped you get to this point where you're at with it now?
If you can, even though it's difficult, like try and proactively reflect on how you feel about it in the time, because it's very easy with insecurities to try and just almost not think about them at all and like borrow yourself away and not ask yourself the difficult questions about how you actually feel, and instead just choose to feel shit. But I guess really ask yourself how it's making you feel. And again, what you did with another, viewer, writing down every time you think about it, that seems like a pretty good strategy. I never did that myself. I can see that adding a lot of value because it just helps you realize how much of your thought it's taking up. Really ask yourself, is it worth it on quite a regular basis, I suppose, and just try and be proactive about how you feel about it. Because if you feel fine about it, then like, you don't need to do anything. But I think the reality is a lot of people with receding hairlines, they don't feel fine about it. There is a lot of insecurity. So just keep asking yourself questions, maybe try and have the tough conversations with other people, and just the tough conversations with yourself about how it makes you feel. Because that was the thing for me. It was just the conversation with myself about, is this really worth it? And I just kind of came to know it's definitely not worth it at this stage.
Yeah.
Seeing how other people felt after shaving it, like with your videos, it was such like, you could see so much, you said liberation between people and how they felt. And, I was like, oh, I'll probably feel that myself. And I did.
That key point that we mentioned earlier of, is the current hair situation, the protocols and the feelings, is it serving you? Like, are you moving forward with it? Like, is it a good thing for you, or is it holding you back from better things?
In fact, almost the most important takeaway of the whole experience of me shaving my head was that, like, I realized how unimportant it is and how little it matters, and there's so many other things which are more important. But as you said, like, these companies and all these people that like are really insecure about it, they'll tell you it's the worst thing in the world. It's not the worst thing, it's just not, it's nothing in reality. I think at least that's how I found it.
And originally from England, the London area, and recently moved to the States, to Vegas, right, to pursue the poker, the professional poker. I'm just really interested in that. Like, when did the playing poker start, and what made you decide, oh, I'm gonna move to Vegas and really go for this?
So I'm 23, about to be 24. But when I was 19, 20, I always liked playing strategy games growing up and just liked problem solving. And I knew how to play like recreation. I knew the rules, and it was something over time I got slightly better at. And it got to a stage where I didn't have to do a student job. And in fact, there was one summer I was working in a pub or working in some factories and doing a bit of temp work. And I was like, screw this. Like, I'm going to work hard at focus. I don't have to do this stuff. I get to do something I enjoy. And I was at university studying engineering. And I was like the most miserable I've probably ever been in my life. I woke up every day and I was thinking, why do I want to do this? And poker was already going relatively well. And it just, I guess throughout most of my life, like, I never made a big leap based on me. I didn't have much self-confidence with making decisions. It was always like listening to other people. And, the infinite amount of people told me I was stupid, or you can't play poker for a living, or you got to finish your degree. And I was like, it was the first thing in my life that I thought I was good at. So I basically just stopped going to university, started playing poker. And now, like 3-ish years later, we're here. I mean, I played professionally in London for basically 2.5, 3 years. Right. And then I got the green card through my parents, and it just made, one, I could make more money here, and two, just an experience as well. I'm young, it's good to take leaps of faith and throw yourself in the deep. I mean, you went to China, for example, I think these experiences are quite valuable. So now I just basically play poker most days and try and improve, and I like it. It's a competitive environment. You've got to outsmart other people. It's nice. It tests you a lot mentally, and I'm very lucky that I found that at a young age, because some people, go through the, it takes until, was it Ricky Gervais was like 35 before he started thinking about The Office and stuff and doing that stuff. That's a lot of time to be in limbo about what you want to do. I'm very fortunate that I found it in my early 20s, for sure, because it's not always that simple.
Yeah, and fortunate that you decided, like, to take the, it's one thing to decide that you're going to pursue that as a career with people telling you, like, no, it's a stupid idea, like, you can't do that realistically, it's just a game or whatever. And not only that, and then this new step with moving to a different country. So I would hypothesize then that you said before you weren't necessarily the most confident person, and those were the first sort of things that you did for yourself. I mean, that has to have some sort of carryover into this most recent thing with shaving your hair.
It probably has like a reasonable effect, and it might be why I probably shaved it a bit earlier in the timeline than the average guy in regards to like how it recedes.
Because thinking about it, if you're saying, right, I want to drop out of uni, I mean, that you would have been like, right, am I going to disappoint my parents or people?
Oh, there was a lot of that. There was a lot of backlash about that, and I think what made me take that leap and the big step with poker was that I think if I just conformed to what they wanted me to do and what I should do as like, early 20 something uni student, I would have regretted not giving poker my all, and I would have always looked back and been like, oh, I probably should have given it a shot. Whereas now, like, I took that leap and there's no regrets of me like maybe I should have stayed in uni. Like, it's definitely like was the right decision, and I don't wake up thinking, oh, I need to do something else, or I don't enjoy this, and I feel lucky, but I took a take quite a big risk, and you surround yourself with the right people, and it can pay off. You have to get, obviously you catch a break here and there, but I think a lot of being successful is just making like small decisions, the correct small decisions on a daily basis. It's not this one big moment where everything counts. It's just doing the right thing on a regular basis.
But it's really interesting because, like you said, there was a bit of sort of people would have worried, let's say, or people would have told you like, no, that's not a good idea. You felt like it was right for you, and if you hadn't have taken the chance, let's say, like you said, you would have probably been still miserable. You would have graduated by now, but possibly, you would have been miserable in some sort of in that career space, always still thinking like, oh, should I have done that? I had people telling me like, no, like you've got loads of hair and you should keep on to it, and I listened to them for a bit, but then I was still miserable. I was still feeling and complaining about it.
I think the big thing about like making big decisions in life is it's not about like listening to people that tell you not to do it, or even the people that tell you to do it. It's like listening to yourself and making the decision which you feels right at the time.
Not to get too like philosophical, but these challenges through life, they make you way more resilient when you face them head on. You kind of go for it.
Yeah, I was actually going to say one thing I thought about even earlier today actually was a lot of people, they view like, everyone kind of loses their hair eventually, but there's always like, oh, that's a tough gig. You lost it in 1920. But the way I kind of see it is, it's quite a valuable experience to go through at a young age. Like, you're going to have so much self-improvement that happening to you at 19, 20, which people that don't have to go through that might never have till their, later 20s, early 30s, where something really like goes wrong, So I actually see it as kind of a positive, whereas I think it's spun in a negative, like, oh, that sucks to go bald in your early 20s or whatever, So I think that's
you're right. That is definitely a positive that can come from it. And I think one of the, you have to take positives from situations, and that is that genuinely is a massive one. Once you can kind of deal with it and get through it, that sets you up for the next thing that you are inevitably going to face. Other things will happen that will be difficult. Well, if you've already dealt with something like this, you're better equipped for dealing with the next thing.
It helps build a lot of inner resilience, I think, just going through the thoughts of like being insecure about it and then being proactive and just going through it. It's definitely very valuable for sure.
Brilliant. Tom, well, listen, man, I've taken up enough of your time.
That's okay.
Really enjoyed this chat, and thank you so much once again for sharing your experience and what helped you through it. And I hope that guys that are listening and watching this can benefit from it, and just have a bit of that self-belief. And I can assess the situation and move past it once and for all. So thank you so much.